What is a telos? In Greek, it means an end goal, a purpose. Aristotle wrote, "Since actions in arts and sciences are many, the ends likewise come to be many. Of the healing art, for instance, health; of the shipbuilding art, a vessel; of the military art, victory; and of domestic management, wealth are respectively the ends." What the Greeks called telos, wrote Cicero, is the supreme, the ultimate, and final good. Telos is not a means to anything higher than itself, but rather is the end toward which everything else is a means. Aristotle gave his definition of happiness as the fulfillment of goals. For instance, a medical student who finally achieves a goal that called for sustained effort derives great pride and happiness by finally becoming a board-certified physician. In our culture, we often confuse happiness with fun. We're told to hedonistically pursue entertainment and encouraged to think that this leads to happiness. It doesn't. Edith Hall, in her book Aristotle's Way, writes, "Yet we are confused about happiness. Almost everyone believes that they want to be happy, which usually means a lasting psychological contentment. If you tell your children you just want them to be happy, you mean permanently. Paradoxically, in our everyday conversations, happiness far more often refers to the trivial and temporary glee of a meal, cocktail, email message." G. E. Moore, author of the influential classic Principia Ethica, takes issue with the modern proponents of hedonism, who equate pleasure with the good. This harks back as early as Epicurus in the ancient world and found its best modern proponents in John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham. Moore is adamant that mere pleasure is not an end in and of itself, but instead says that what is good is defined by something that comes closest to its standard, that is to say, its archetype, its telos. For instance, if a standard circle has a round symmetrical perimeter, a lumpy lopsided circle would not be said to be a good circle. A circle is only good insofar as it approaches the archetype of the circle. Likewise, a good clock is a clock that keeps time well, as is demanded in the archetype of the clock. Or a good pair of shoes are shoes that perfectly serve the function of the archetype of shoes. Physical objects aren't the only things that have their standards. Human beings can aspire to achieve their standard, whereupon a man aspiring to be a plumber is said to be a good plumber insofar as he conforms to the characteristics of the archetypal plumber. Wherever he falls short of the standard, he is said to be a bad plumber, or a bad politician, or a bad parent. As Hegel wrote, "Evil is nothing but the incompatibility between what is and what ought to be." Of course, all of these endeavors are difficult to achieve, but insofar as a man gets close to his telos, his end goal, he will find fulfillment, and as Aristotle said, happiness. As Cicero pointed out, there are no statues dedicated to men whose sole goal in life was amusement. We respect people who did something hard. It is these individuals who achieve something difficult who are commemorated in bronze or marble. Learning a language may be difficult and require years to obtain fluency, but once mastered, this challenging endeavor is a source of lasting happiness. Going to a theme park, by contrast, produces mere fun, not happiness. It's junk food for the soul. To return to the aforementioned Aristotle, he talks about the frustration in a person's life when his means don't match his telos. Say, for instance, someone whose goal is to be a doctor, but instead he's working as a cashier in a convenience store. If the path doesn't lead to the destination, then the person will end up thwarted, unfulfilled, frustrated. We must, so far as possible, try to match up our means with our end, and to keep that end constantly in sight, directing our every small step toward it. Without that end goal, that telos, people expend wasted energy. The psychological duress of being in a hamster wheel that leads nowhere, in extreme cases, can conduce to substance abuse. The drug cocaine, for instance, releases dopamine in the brain, which simulates the same feeling someone gets from achieving a long sought-after goal. This is tricking the brain and cheating the addict. It's the joy of accomplishment, without the actual accomplishment. But as the effects of the drug wear off, the person crashes emotionally. His dopamine-induced chimera dissolves into disappointment and a feeling of emptiness. In Greek, the word eidos translates as an inner shame and connotes a falling short of one's potential, one's telos. So much pain and substance abuse in our society can be traced directly back to people who were never taught to conserve their energy and direct their steps toward a telos. Alistair MacIntyre, in After Virtue, talks about certain philosophers who abandon the notion of a telos, writing, "All reject any teleological view of human nature, any view of man as having an essence which defines his true end. But to understand this is to understand why their project of finding a basis for morality had to fail. The moral scheme which forms the historical background of their thought had, as we have seen, a structure which required three elements: untutored human nature, man as he could be if he realized his telos, and the moral precepts which enable him to pass from one state to the other. But the joint effect of the secular rejection of both Protestant and Catholic theology and the scientific and philosophical rejection of Aristotelianism was to eliminate any notion of man as he could be if he realized his telos. since the whole point of ethics, both as a theoretical and a practical discipline, is to enable a man to pass from his present state to his true end. A society that doesn't teach children to pursue their telos is a society that sets its youth up for frustration and depression. William James wrote, "Compared to what we ought to be, we are only half awake. We are making use of only a small part of our physical and mental resources." In other words, having a purpose, a telos, is to provide one with a sense of destiny, and this is why ethics is so important, because as Heraclitus said thousands of years ago, character is destiny. Homeschooling is exploding in popularity. If you want to use materials that set your kids up for success rather than self-sabotage, check out Freedom Project Academy. Go to fpeusa.org. Pass on a traditionalist education that inculcates classical values and logical thinking. fpeusa.org. Freedom Project Academy.